Okay, so welcome to Pushing Beyond the Obvious Leadership Edition. We've been having this conversation with many people around leadership and the need for leadership and how do you show up as leaders. So in the same series, today I'm super glad to host Sophie on the podcast. And Sophie, for people who are not familiar with your work, can you please introduce yourself and maybe touch a little bit upon what is it that lights you up?
Oh, wonderful. Hi, Mukesh, and thank you for having me. I have a background in internationalization strategy. And so I love the world. I love getting out in the world. I love exploring the world. And I'm super lucky to have a passport where I can experience the world. And I've traveled with work. I think I've managed projects in around 25 countries, and I've done that with big business, government, and when I worked in international economic development at the International Trade Center, which is the joint agency of the UN and WTO. So I feel super lucky to be able to experience the world, but I know that the world is a really less than great place for lots of people. And I really care about that. And I've spent my career, the last 20 years or so, trying to find my way of making the world a little bit better for people who aren't as fortunate as me to be born potluck with the right passport. And so what lights me up is finding possibility in the world and creating ways for people to step into possibility. And in particular, the sweet spot is economic growth, economic opportunity, democratization of opportunity, that kind of thing.
Interesting. I think economic opportunity is a indicator of everything else that follows as well, right? So people say that money is not everything, but if you don't have enough, then it becomes everything because that's sustenance. And by enabling people to be financially independent or financially secure enough, you then create the opportunity for them to think about larger things, think about arts, think about helping others to grow, think about everything else, right? So that way, I think the work that you're doing is phenomenal. And one of the way I get to know you was through the Thought Leaders Business School community. And we had a conversation and kind of clicked. You came to Singapore, we met, and one thing led to the other. And I'm really excited to see where this entire journey of yours is going to take you. So you spoke about possibility, right? So can you expand a little bit upon that? And what do you mean by possibility? And what do you mean by stepping into possibility?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we could probably spend hours talking about possibility, but I think sort of at its heart, the world feels like it's lacking possibility, but for not only those that might be, for example, at the bottom of the pyramid, but all across the world. It can feel as though we're living in really dark times. I mean, look at the news, pick your device, pick your media forum, printed media, digital media. And the news is of course quite negative. And it looks like the world is a really troubled and bad place. There is, of course, war in Europe. Who thought that would happen? There's geopolitical risk and tension in Asia, and there's all sorts of conflict in other parts of the world, and there's distrust with big business and technology, and it's just a lot of negative narrative, and it doesn't feel like there is possibility. And I think what I observe, what happens in that sense, is that people tend to shrink down. And it's safer to go small, it's safer to play small, it's safer to focus on what you know and what you can control. And so I appreciate that the world feels as though there isn't possibility. It feels stuck. It feels like it's stagnating. It feels like things are spiraling out of control. And, that's people in my family feel that way, let alone people who are, affected by a natural, disaster, conflict, the world is going through a tough time economically, of course. And so I don't obsess over the dark side, if you like, but it's a reality. But what I do, I can't help but kind of try to face into the light, into that possibility, and it's there. And I'm super lucky to have stumbled across the exponential organization framework that you're familiar with, Mukesh. And I think I joined the community as number 253, and now there's close to 25,000 members. And it's a framework that Salim Ismail, he studied 200 of the world's fastest growing companies, unicorns. 6 years ago, he released a book, and it's what's working in the world. How are things growing? And we might not like it. I don't necessarily love everything that big tech does, but what they're doing is creating new value in the world. And that's like a seed of possibility. And that's the space that I largely work in now. Mukesh, you're on mute.
So 3.5 years of doing this and still struggle with this. Anyway, so I think what I was saying was that I think what Exponential Organization as a book and as a framework did for a lot of fast-growing startups is phenomenal. It unlocked value at pace which was unheard of. Right, so right from early days of technology adoption, when it comes to mobile phone, to today, ChatGPT, the pace at which organizations can actually grow and scale has become phenomenal. Right, now the question then is there learnings that we as individuals can take from Exponential Organization framework, or any other similar frameworks that you have come across that then allows us the ability to, number one, learn from the framework, number two, also implement some of those strategies in our lives so that we stop shrinking, and start growing.
Yeah, absolutely. My work as an EXO coach involves getting very ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And that is because they're these legacy companies where they work, it might be oil and gas, infrastructure, agriculture, manufacturing, you name it. These companies know that they need to do something different. And there is this framework that works. And so as a coach, as a corporate innovation sprint coach, as a corporate venture building coach, I work with very ordinary people like you and me, Mukesh. Mukesh, we've met, we've had dinner together in Singapore. You're wonderful, but you're also ordinary like me, right? Like we're very, like and so we have hopes, dreams, and aspirations in the world. And someone who has a sense that there can be better in the world, they have a sense that they can do or be something bigger in the world, is such an amazing pot of potential, if you like, that I get to work with. And so even though we're wanting to capture growth for a validated business model and capture at least 10 times, the business model has to produce 10 times the financial, the return on investment, if you like. Working with ordinary people to do extraordinary things is a process of indeed getting them to change how they work, who they work, sort of their network, their ways of working, the frameworks they're using, and also how they work in terms of how they believe in themselves and the potential in the world. And so what is really, really fundamental, I'd say the first thing is to zoom out, and it's to see the world as one, to see the connectivity in the world. to see that we're almost 5 billion people, with a smartphone or another connected device at our fingertips, and to see the world as one, as a blank canvas, if you like, to see the world as opportunity, because that's what the world's fastest growing companies do. They see the world as one, and they build something for the whole world, of course, and then they come down and look at how do we localize and what are the requirements that we need to adhere to, and so on. So it's seeing this bigger picture, seeing that we're connected. And of course, it's other things. It's letting ideas win over hierarchy. Steve Jobs said, let's let ideas win over hierarchy. That can be really, really challenging in a corporate environment where the corporate immune system attacks, as Salim Ismail, my founder in the Exo World, says. The corporate immune system will attack. The societal immune system will attack, but also your inner critic is going to attack. It's going to be, why you? Why do you get to do this? And so it's helping to overcome these, and there are ways of doing that. And it's also being inspired by what I call unusual suspects. It's the 15 and 16-year-olds that are coming up with cancer detection devices because of open source data, and studying studying a MOOC to identify how to come up with a novel approach to cancer detection. And it's looking at the world as one opportunity. Let's start here, solve for one, and then scale and solve for many. And it's that belief that it's possible, and also building a global network, not being kept small by where you are and the voices you hear and the limiting beliefs that you might be around, but it's saying, who are the biggest and brightest minds, and how do we connect over the problem we're trying to solve? What's the purpose that drives us? And when we can connect with them, we can invite them into our world for an hour to tap into their hearts and minds, to get their expertise, or we can invite them on the journey for a month or a year. And we've got the agility to do that. So being less kind of confined by structure and so on, more agility. And also, let's get out into the world. Let's explore the world and conduct a series of small experiments. And to experiment is to learn, is to keep moving. And so they're for me, what we want an organization to do that is growing and thriving in the world at an individual level. They're the key things that come to mind for me.
Interesting. So one of my mentors, Boris Munshi, when I speak to him, every time I speak to him, he would always insist that process trumps talent. So he says that extraordinary things can be done by ordinary people as long as you have the right process, and which also includes subconscious processes as well. For example, beliefs, the fears, how do you address all of them? So process beats talent or trumps talent is one of the things that he always talks about. And the other thing that he would always say is that, if you really truly want breakthrough growth or breakthrough results, one of the things that you need to stop doing is going after a 10%, 20%, or even, for example, 100% growth. So the moment you are doing 100% growth, you're still doing the same stuff, but working harder. The moment you say 10x or 15x or 20x, then you know that you cannot achieve that by doing the same things or working harder. You need to fundamentally change how you approach work. You have to fundamentally change how you see things. You have to fundamentally change how you interact with people. Everything needs to change, right? And even if you do, let's say 50% of what you aimed for, it's already 5x of what you were. And that's significant when you look at the larger scheme of things. And I see you talking about the same things or similar themes as well. So you spoke about 3 or 4 things, right? So one is to look at the larger picture or the larger world and see that everything is connected, and that the opportunity is not just limited to the place where we are in or the community that we are serving, but the opportunity could be global as the entire world as a village or so. So for me, it's talking about awareness. So the first and foremost is being aware that you can actually play at a level where the entire world is your playground. And once you have that awareness, Then you spoke about belief, right? So believing that you have the capability and the opportunity to actually uh, 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 make a play in the playground that is the entire world. And once you have that, then comes fear, which is, how do you address that fear of failure, fear of success, fear of whatever, right? So there are many, many fears that stop us. Fear of social ridicule. People say, okay, who are you to think you can change the world, or who are you to think that you can actually build something at a global scale, and things like that. Fear of standing out. So the question then is, out of all of these things, the immune system that you speak about, right? So self-belief, social structures around you. So how do you break through all of this? As they say, rocket, the most energy that it takes is at the liftoff, right? So how do you create that liftoff?
Yeah, great question. What works in my world is an immersive experience of like an obsession level of a bombardment, if you like, of what's working in the world, so that there's a very renewed view of the world. And so it's like in an EXO sprint, we have typically what's called an align week, where it's a full week of this is what's working. And there are interactive exercises. And this is what I do, something similar with other clients as well. And what we do is really imagine, once we understand what's possible in the world because of the convergence of exponential technologies, for example, once we can see that there's innovative business models that allow the creation, capture, and I think the distribution of value in the world, we get a sense that there's more than meets the eye. We get a sense that there is indeed this other layer. There is possibility. There's a lot working in the world. But then when you add an additional dimension of getting people to do things that they feel very uncomfortable doing, but you cram in a lot in a short space of time, how people think and feel shifts. And what you really want to do is make people think, feel, and see things in their mind's eye that they can't unsee, think and feel. And so, for example, it's looking at pick a technology or a global trend, and what's the absolute worst outcome for humanity and society and the environment. Go there. And then, on the other hand, what's the absolute best outcome, looking at across the board, looking at for society, for the environment. Governments are thriving, they've got money to invest in healthcare, education, like the very best of what can happen in the world and the very worst. But of course, what we also want to do with tapping into the hearts and minds of people and letting them make it very personal for themselves is to tap into what they really care about. And a lot of times, like I'm a business person, I'm about creating economic opportunity. And I've spent a lot of my career working in the developing world and in emerging markets, and I still do. And people say, oh, technology, it's kind of evil, it displaces people. And yes, there is displacement and there's ways of managing that. But I kind of think until every wicked problem in the world is solved, we've got to keep creating alternatives. We've got to keep creating mechanisms to solve these problems. And what I love about when an exponential technology comes down in price and becomes accessible, and its power, the doubling power and the price is driving down, it becomes available to anyone in the world. And so if you give someone the tools and the confidence, if they've got the ambition to solve a problem and the agency, the ability to use it, they're unstoppable. And I'm all for bring on the competition. Let's solve these problems. I mean, I love, open innovation challenges and whatnot, but I also love that anyone, anywhere, be it a 16-year-old or a 76-year-old who's got the drive to do that. So tapping into what people really care about and giving them the agency. And I say the unapologetic ambition. If you're going to tackle a problem, go global domination, tackle that problem and dominate the planet in that space. And so I spend a lot of time giving people, you know, in a fun way, if you like, that the belief that that's possible, because I believe we need that in the world. And once people believe that they can, and they feel confident, they feel buoyed by experimenting. So this, you know, de-risked approach, that also increases the agency and the confidence to do the job.
Interesting. So I know that you have this very interesting thinking around a contrast frame, if I may say so, around having a mindset which is kind of, you know, limited versus mindset that is kind of, you know, expanded. So can you just walk us through what is the difference between being limited versus having an expanded mindset or perspective?
Yeah, great. Sure. So I started the year middle of summer in Melbourne, and I had COVID. And so I had time on my hands because I self-isolated and whatnot. And I was really thinking about this worldview. What's the worldview that people are going to have in 2023? And as we started in our conversation, Mukesh, a lot of people have this very limited worldview. There's, it's based on the negative news, and it's sort of scarcity driven, and it's focused on, in the business world and even in government and multilateral organizations, there's a lot of focus on what can we correct, how can we add a digital layer, but how do we ultimately maintain our control, how do we do those 10% fixes? And so it's looking at small improvements, but to maintain our position, our standing in the world, if you like. And then another sort of perspective or aspect to this limited worldview is to focus, of course, geographically local, but it's also to look at the world not really as changing. It's a natural instinct to focus on what we can control. So we compete, we're not looking at new threats. We're not looking at new competitors. We're not exploring what might be on the horizon, what might actually be disruptive. And it's not expanding our worldview to see that. And it's looking at the past to define the future, or it's just looking at the present without really looking forward. And it's probably being a little bit suspicious of technology. Some people with this limited worldview, they love getting out in the world, but they'll only do it if they get on, in my country, you've got to get on an airplane to go to, another country. They'll only explore the world face-to-face, in person. And don't get me wrong, I love getting out in the world. Okay, there's an environmental impact that we should acknowledge. But I think this expanded worldview is rather looking at the world as we are this connected world. We are a world where the world is our opportunity, the world is our playground, but it's also where disruption and threats come from. There are new competitors that are emerging. It's also looking at, we don't have to network in a room where we're located. We can build a global network from anywhere in the world. It's having more so of a future orientation. And it's it's saying, what are the tools that we can use to create something new in the world, and not being confined by maybe the rules of the past or what worked in the past. And so for me, that is that looking at, well, what's working in the world and how do you make it work for you? So that expanded worldview. And the way I think about it is, if the limited worldview is kind of to say that you only want to go out into the world during daylight, it's to be afraid of the dark. And yet to be afraid of the dark means you don't get to go out at night and you don't get to see the stars. And then you miss out on the universe.
That's beautiful, actually. So this metaphor, I think when I first read about it, it just took my breath away, because I'll tell you this, people who know me really well know that I'm really, really afraid of water, to get into water. So I've been trying a lot of things to kind of overcome the fear of drowning. And I've also realized that I really like um, when I watch videos, I really like the experience that people have of actually having done scuba diving or being inside the water. So I know that I'm missing out on all of that experience because of this fear of water. And when you talk about being afraid of dark and missing out on the stars, that's exactly what I felt, being afraid of water and missing out of all those experiences of being in the water. So it is a very, very powerful analogy or a metaphor that you talk about. You also spoke about the fact that looking at both extremes. So what's the worst that can happen, and what's the best that can happen? And by doing this, you're also kind of pushing people outside of their comfort zone and kind of expand their worldview in both sides. And as someone very wise once said, an expanded mind, once a mind is expanded, cannot go back to its original size.
Yeah.
And creating discomfort by showing both the possibilities also creates discomfort within us. And out of that discomfort is what I think change comes through. The energy to overcome inertia comes through that discomfort. And I think that's a brilliant strategy to kind of drive that. So let me come back to some of the things that I've been watching you do on Instagram. So I mean, I've been seeing you click pictures of colors everywhere. I can see on your background you have a world which is full of colors. So you also talk about color my world, many places. So explain to me what is this color my world, and why is this obsession with colors?
Yeah, great. We started the conversation, Mukesh, around the world feeling stuck and stagnant, and it really feels quite grey and muted, and yet there's bursts of colour. Something's working. There are winners in the world, but it feels out of reach for most people. And so colour your world is about so much of what we've just been speaking about. It's about tapping into, who are you? If you have a sense that there's more to do, that you could do more, and if you have the ability to get up and do something, but also if you can intellectualize that there's a shift at play in the world, then you have colour that I feel it's like bursting. It's bursting to get out of you into the world. And so if we think of the world as one, then the world really is a blank canvas. And there's enough to do in the world. Pick your problem. Pick any problem. Pick a really small problem. Pick a huge problem, a wicked problem. Pick your problem and splash your colour on that canvas. And so the world can feel really grey, but it shouldn't. And it's never been more important to get out and explore the world, and it's never been easier. I've met you in, we met through an Australian organisation. You're now in Germany, but you're normally in Singapore, where we met in person, and you're from India, and we're able to be globalized ourselves. Now, globalization, I know, is not a very popular term right now, but we can be worldly. Maybe that's a more romantic term. We can be worldly, and we can be explorers. We can explore the world, and we can look for color. And what I invite people to do is to look for color out in the world, not just in nature and art and so on, but also what's working. And a really, really wonderful thing, of course, we've seen earlier this year, we saw what's working. ChatGPT went, to 100 million users in 60 days. It broke all sorts of records. But of course, generative AI can be our co-pilot to get out into the world. Anything you want to ask about the world, you can go somewhere. You can, if you're wanting to know, how do I write an email to someone who's based in another country, like quite quite sort of foundational level stuff. But if that's where you're at to start, go for it. And then earlier today, I was in a client call where a team had made a pitch video using only generative AI. So of course, from imaging to text to voice, audio, to even drafting the pitch, the narrative, and the confidence they had around what they'd done and what they'd learned as a process of it was just so wonderful and inspiring. And so the world can feel quite grey, but if it does, I invite people to look for colour. And my next sort of phase in life is to bring that colour out into the world. So colour your world is to really bring that colour that is bursting to get out into the world, because we need that. We need it for every individual. And then we have this beautiful coloured canvas that is our world.
This is super great. People who have been following my show, they know that, and I've talked about this multiple times, that almost 90% or 95% of all my guests that I've had on my show, I've met them online. And 80% of them I've not even seen in person yet. So I also talk a lot about learning from people, whether or not they are in your world as such. So, for example, Dave Snowden is someone I learn a lot from. I've learned a lot from Eliyahu Goldratt. I've learned a lot from Boris Munshi. I've learned a lot from Matt Church. I've learned a lot from, let's say, one of my schoolmates from school about life and things like that. So, as you rightly say, it is gone are those days where you were limited by your reach, or limited by the place where you are located in, limited by people you know. Today, I think we have reached a point where you're only limited by what you limit yourself with. So self-limitation is the only limitation. I know this because earlier today morning, I was actually, while having a breakfast, I was watching a video on YouTube of two brilliant women who have written a book on art and science. So neuroscience of art. And they say that, how art, engaging in some form of art creates new neural connections in your brain, which can actually help you be more creative at work. Even 15 minutes of some kind of art. It could be music, it could be dance, it could be drawing, painting, whatever, singing, whatever you think is art, creates a lot more connections. So the reason why I'm talking about all of this is that I think the limitation that we put on ourselves needs to expand. So which means that the limitations needs to reduce, and our ability to think about what we can do and where we need to play need to continuously evolve as we are evolving as well. One of the things that I also kind of strongly believe is that we need role models of people who actually step up into the possibilities and reach for the stars. Whether they fail or whether they succeed, it doesn't matter. But the very act of stepping into possibility and reaching for stars is something that we really need. And more so when it comes to leadership or being a leader. I think the world today lacks good leaders across the board, whether it is in organizations, whether it is in society, whether it is personal leadership, whether it is political leadership. We really need people to step into big leadership roles wanting to solve big problems. Climate will not solve by itself. Hunger and poverty will not solve by itself. A political divide and polarization will not solve by itself. So I think that's where, if you actually ask me, my take on what you spoke about from a color, your world, comes from that lens, which is, if can we be one of those people who can actually bring the color, our own colors out, but at the same time, enable or encourage others to bring their colors out and go for the stars as well. Sorry, I'm kind of talking about all of this because I'm really passionate about this, and I think the time is there, or right now is the time when we need people who can actually not only go for the stars but also take people along. One of the biggest things, one of the most irritating thing for me in the past couple of years has been when people say, let's go for the low-hanging fruits. And what happens then is, you get the low-hanging fruits, and then there are some more low-hanging fruits somewhere else, and the entire organization then, or the entire, whether it is political organization, social organization, economic organization, all of us then tend to take it easy because going after the low-hanging fruit is very easy, and in your comfort zone. So we never ever go or stretch beyond. In fact, last week I was kind of pushing a set of people to think bigger and go for a slightly more difficult thing to do, but the right thing to do. And I was pushed back, saying that no, we can't do this. Let's take it one step at a time. Let's do this first. Let's see how this works. I understand all of that thinking, but at the same time, if you don't have the larger vision that you're going after, you tend to stay at that bottom level, and which is, in my opinion, a loss of a lot of potential right there. Sorry, I've been rambling around.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree, Mukesh. And it's quite a vulnerable position. As companies are having to make tough decisions, if you're not creating value, are you potentially vulnerable at times of contraction and reorganization and so on? So it does take courage, doesn't it? It does take courage to back, or for a leader to back others to move into a space where you're creating. And I think there seems, I'd love to get your perspective. Some of the clients I work with in parts of the business, there's a reaction that anything different is high risk, high stakes. And there's just a preference to not do it because times are tough. Whereas there's, the reason why I'm there is because there's another school of thinking. It might just be one or two people that is, well, actually, if we don't do this, we're in really big trouble. And so there's greater interest, and I dare say at times there's ambition. There's greater ambition. So for example, an agriculture company, I've spent some time working with a large company across Asia. The CEO of the business said, I think in a couple of years' time, if we are still involved in the slaughtering of animals, I will be held liable. It will be an offense. And so within that, there's a quiet ambition to reach for something bigger. And there's a call to action of, we need to stop doing this. What's the alternative? And we know that the technology provides alternatives. So, based meat and, lab grown meat and so on, alternative proteins and so on. And so that's not to say that we automatically land on the best solution. There's a process to go through. But asking the question, I wonder if there's a better alternative, and creating the space. And I loved before when you mentioned color and your take on it. A big part of it is inviting people to play, because when we're little, you can't tell a toddler how to paint, right? They're just going to do whatever stuff they want to do, and they're going to be very proud of their masterpiece. And I think let's let people have space to play, but let's give them a framework and unlearn some stuff so that they can create in a way that is tapping into their heart and mind. Because when people believe in what they're going to do, they're going to reach higher and they're going to work harder to actually achieve it. And so creating the space to play, have time in a sandbox, unstructured play, a lot of experimentation, and absolutely the ambition to do something that's needed in the world. And I agree, Mukesh, we need leaders in the world who are role models. And what I love about this connected world where we can see and learn and connect with more people is there are more of these unusual suspects. And so let's not fall into the habit of looking in our media area. You're in Singapore, I'm in Australia, we're in very privileged parts of the world. But I would put my hand up and say that, we need a whole new update to leadership levels in my country and in lots of, parts of the world. And so let's look at other places, unfamiliar faces in, new places, and be inspired there as well.
So people who know me, they also know that I'm a big movie buff. I love watching movies. And I was on a long flight from Singapore to Germany and then had some time here in Germany as well. So yesterday I was watching this movie called Hidden Figures. This is about the story of three women who played a super important role in NASA in their entire space journey, right? So one of the women that they talk about, she kind of plays a supervisor in the entire for all the women, but at the same time is not the supervisor, but plays the role of a supervisor, which is does all the job without the title or the pay. And she gets to know that NASA has bought IBM computers, and there is a whole set of women who are actually the computers for NASA, but until then. But with the advent of computers coming in, she realizes that they will all be out of a job. And she, instead of getting afraid, what she does is she steps into the possibility. She starts exploring how can she program or learn to program and work with the computers rather than being afraid or resisting the technology to come into the organization. And that one shift in her approach, or that one approach, saved everybody's job, because she not only learned herself, but she also taught to everyone else. And that's exactly what we need to do. I mean, ChatGPT is nothing different, or for that matter, artificial intelligence is nothing different. It's exactly the same thing, just a different time, just a different tool.
Absolutely. And just experiment. A client I work with has recently said we're freezing consulting hires, and we want every staff to spend a certain percentage of their time using generative AI in its place. It's an experiment.
Yeah.
It's an experiment. Yeah.
So in my book, Thrive, which I wrote about 5 years back, I talk about 9 mindsets that we need in order to succeed in a world where we are surrounded by smart machines and intelligent algorithms. And one of the mindset that I spoke about was a scientist's mindset, which is, run controlled experiments. Do something, observe, first have a theory as to if I do this, I believe this might happen. Then go ahead and do it and observe whether what you theorize actually happens or not. If it does, what did you learn from it? If it doesn't, why it didn't happen? What did you learn from it? And these micro experiments can actually, take you in areas which can be significantly bigger, profitable, and interesting areas to go into.
Yeah, absolutely. And companies that are mandating, if you like, the use of generative AI, they're saying to their people, like large organizations, they're not rolling out training programs. There isn't the time to do that. But it's also saying to their people, we believe in you to experiment. We believe in you to give it a go and to, here are some parameters. But also we don't have to explore and experiment in the world alone. And so whenever I'm with clients and there's a mind shift piece, like when you have to let ideas win over hierarchy, how do you let ideas win? So how do you give feedback that don't, so you're not stifling ideas and innovation? It's like, this is going to be really hard, actually. Once you go back to your desk on Monday, it's going to be hard, but it's hardest if you're alone. So find a couple of people who are here in this virtual or physical room and support each other in that process. If you're going to be accountability group, whatever you want to call it, so be it. But run experiments, and in the least support each other and do hold each other accountable in the sense of, I'm struggling to let this idea win because everything in me is screaming, no, that's not what we do. No, that's how we've never done it before. No, that will never work. No, I don't understand the first thing about this. And so have people in your area around you who you can talk to about that, to push through that barrier, but then also expand your network of possibility. The number one stifling aspect of all of this, in my experience, is someone saying, but I'm not an expert in that space. And my response is, you don't want to be an expert. The world is changing so quickly. Know where the experts are and have the ability to get and reach them. Yeah.
So the only thing that I would like to be an expert in is being an expert learner.
Yeah, nice. And Rikesh, I think you are.
So one of the skill sets that I talk about in the same book, Thrive, as a keystone skill that each one of us needs to build upon, is our ability to learning how to learn. And that's a keystone skill that if we are able to develop that, and the ability to find things and quickly learn things, and on an ongoing basis keep finding things to learn, keep learning, keep finding more things to learn, keep learning, I think that expands your perspective, and with an expanded mind and an expanded perspective, it is more likely that you're going to go after bigger things rather than just be in your nice little comfortable bubble. Porus Munshi, again, I'm bringing him in. So he said that once you're in a very comfortable, nice little bubble, the risk is that by the time you realize that the bubble is going to burst, you're so comfortable that you've lost all ability to respond to whatever happens when the bubble bursts. So actively trying to expand and get into a bigger and bigger bubble is super important for you to kind of survive in the world that we are kind of going into.
Yeah, absolutely.
So go ahead. You're saying something.
No, all good.
So we are almost time that we had. We have about 10 minutes. So let's just quickly come to some very specific questions that I have for you. So first one is, if someone who has listened to this conversation wants to kind of go on this journey to start moving from being in a limited perspective or mindset to becoming having or developing an expanded perspective, what are the 2 or 3 things that you suggest them to do, which can actually help them take the first step? Because the first 2 steps or 3 steps is what is the most difficult. So what would your recommendation be in terms of first 1, 2, or 3 steps that they can take?
Yeah, sure. First of all, notice, like, where are you living in the world? If you're only looking at local news, only talking to locals, expecting expertise to be in your area, okay, so just notice, so like a little bit of a self-audit. But then also start looking out in the world at what is working, where is there, success, if you like. And it might not be success that you want to emulate, but notice where things are happening that's different. And an example is when the pandemic hit, there was this feeling of, oh my gosh, we're not going to have a vaccine for years, because traditionally vaccine discovery and commercialization took, I think it's on average 10 years. However, within 12 months of the pandemic hitting, we had 7 vaccines commercialized. And that's because of technology allowing, big data to be shared, and the world's biggest minds coming together to create vaccines and get them rolled out into the world. Whether you like them or you don't like them, the underlying principle is we are in this connected world, and people are working together. They're coming together to create new outcomes. What could that mean for you?
Okay. So the second question, one of the things, as we spoke about, right, is to kind of continuously expand our thinking, look at broader horizons. So what exactly do you do as an individual to kind of continuously expand your horizons and perspectives?
Yeah, great. I live in Australia, but I don't spend much time here. I don't travel very much. I don't get on an airplane, but I spend the majority of my clients are overseas, my network. And I've got colleagues, Mukesh, like you, we have spent hundreds of hours working together, but we've never met face to face. And so no doubt when we finally meet, it'll be, oh my gosh, you're that short or tall, those reactions. But I believe we make our world through our people to people interactions. And I'm very lucky to even, through the pandemic, Melbourne was one of the world's most locked down cities outside of China. I'm super lucky to be getting out every day and Zooming around the world. And one of my teams was actually in China. And at the time there was, a lot of love lost between China and Australia from a political perspective. And I was working with them on a project, and we reached a milestone. And at the conclusion of the project, we had a virtual, because we were virtual all the time, we had a virtual party, and they all bought Australian wine to the virtual party. And that's what makes the world feel small and the possibilities great. Getting out into the world, meeting people. If you don't know what to do, the very best thing to do is to reach out to someone and ask a question. And not everyone is open, but like you, Mukesh, I find most people are really open to it, open to having a discussion, a dialogue, and an exchange, particularly if you're on a path of discovery, because I think most of us are.
That's a very deep thought. Everyone is in the process of some sort of discovery or on some sort of journey that we are going on to. So we spoke a lot about experimentation, right? So what are you experimenting with right now?
Oh, that's a good one, Mukesh. Definitely generative AI. It's a little bit going down a rabbit hole. You can lose a whole lot of time, but I'm loving it. I'm loving learning more about the world. And what I'm experimenting with is leapfrogging in terms of time and knowledge, and also having fun. And so I'm working on a project with someone, Shane Williams, and he's been using photo AI to create some images, and they're an absolute hoot. Like, what they can communicate is far beyond what we would have in the past. And so it's trying to, what I'm experimenting with constantly is doing, I take my work very seriously, but I like to do it in a way that is light and not so serious. And I think that connectivity and using technology allows us to do that.
So I remember Matt Church talking about holding something tightly in your hand with your palms open.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
Interesting. So the show is called Pushing Beyond the Obvious. So what is so obvious to you that people always miss and makes you go, ugh?
It's one world. We, as people, as humanity, we have put lines and borders and barriers up. But it is one world. And Ron Garan, the NASA astronaut, speaks of when he was on the International Space Station and he saw the Earth, planet Earth, for the first time. He was, of course, struck by its beauty, but its oneness. We are one planet. And when we look at it as one, we can solve as one. We can have leaders who, my dream is indeed having leaders who lead in the world, with the world, for the world. And so you can bring people together and you can use technology to really solve, the economics of it can work, and tapping into what matters. And so for me, that seems obvious, but I am struck that it's actually not for many people. Yeah.
Super. Thank you so much, Sophie, for taking time and talking to us today. I enjoyed the conversation a lot. I'm pretty sure that anyone who's listening to this conversation would enjoy the conversation and at the same time take away important insights as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Pushing Beyond the Obvious. If you like the show and would like to support, please head over to iTunes or wherever you are listening to this show and rate us and write a review. Till next time, have fun.